You will have noticed that Mrs. Dalloway does not proceed in a traditional linear fashion. A great deal happens in this novel. A great deal happens beneath the surface of the characters, as we've already suggested, and uh, connections are formed across the text that don't follow each other in a simple linear plot-based way. We're going to look at the beginning of the novel and think about time and space in particular, and how the novel treats them, and how Mrs. Dalloway, at the opening of the novel, goes through a rich sequence of emotions, tremendous sort of inner changes, a real drama of consciousness, we might say, drama of feelings. So let's begin by looking at some of the things that Woolf is doing with time at the opening of the novel. We begin on the morning of Clarissa Dalloway's party. It's mid-June, a few years after the end of World War I. We're told that she has lived in Westminster. Westminster is in the centre of London. It's the seat of government. It's where the Houses of Parliament are. It's where the 10 Downing Street is, where the Prime Minister lives. This is really the locus of metropolitan power and imperial power in London. So she's lived there. Her husband, we know, is in Parliament. They've lived there for 20 years. She is now, we're told, in her early 50s. But she's continually looking back to moments from much earlier in her life. She has a very vivid and active memory for events that occurred many years before sometimes, but which have come back into her mind because of events occurring now. It's not a hugely significant day, perhaps, for Clarissa Dalloway, though her party is obviously very important to her. She suffers various things. She suffers a snub, as she takes it from Lady Bruton. And there's the excitement and the shock of the return of Peter Walsh, who has been in India for 5 years, I think we're told. Now, the novel reminds us at various points that time is passing. And one of the main reminders is Big Ben. This is the bell in the tower in Parliament. The leaden circles dissolved in the air, we're told. And I think that image of leaden circles, rather like the circles that widen out if you throw a pebble into a pond, are quite a good image of the way the novel works, the way the novel connects up otherwise unconnected things, and suggests the far-reaching significance of small things, how one thing can affect another and another and another. Rather like that strange image we have. Let me find it. Where we're told of a device that is so sensitive that, this is on page 18, something so trifling in the single instances that no mathematical instrument, though capable of transmitting shocks in China, could register the vibration. There's something even more sophisticated than that going on here. It's as if the novel itself, I think, is very interested in registering those far-off shocks, whether they're shocks in the distant past, shocks in memory, or shocks in the present, things that connect people as they brush past each other in the course of the day. These circles that aren't always perceptible or material or concrete, but nonetheless are very powerful. The circles that connect up the feelings between people, the patterns of their experience, the patterns of their unfolding lives. It's the time of the London season. The London season is a series of social events that occur in London and around London. Some of them are outside London, involving various kind of recreational activities, garden parties. There's the horse racing at Ascot, for example, and so on. That's the London season. And for people who are part of London life, this is always an important event on the calendar. It lasts through the summer months of London, in London. But we're also getting a strong sense of the past. We're starting to fill in a sense, even from very early in the novel, of Clarissa Dalloway's history, the life that she has led, the choices that she has made, or the choices that seem to have been made for her. In the recent past, well, she talks about her illness. This is probably the influenza epidemic that swept around the world right at the very end of World War One. Actually, people always say killed more people than were killed in World War One, and that's affected her. It's affected her heart. It's turned her white. We're told, presumably she's pale because of this. Perhaps her hair has gone white. We're also reminded, of course, that the war is still a large and looming presence in the book. There is Mrs. Foxcroft at the embassy, who is still obviously in desperate grief for the death of her son during the war. And there's the sense that the war, I think, has reshaped society, as we've been suggesting. And this novel, among other things, I think is trying to take stock, trying to sort of say, well, what is it now to be in Britain, to be British, to be part of an empire after the enormous disaster and loss of life of World War One. Then there are Clarissa's very personal memories, going back to her youth in the country at Bourton, presumably a country house where she grew up. Her odd, prickly, but important relationship with Peter Walsh. They've had some very strong connection, but she has chosen Richard Dalloway over Peter Walsh, and this is the sort of source of their difficulties in the end. She remembers and points us to the limitations of her marriage to Richard and her love back in the past, her love for Sally Seton, another woman, her attraction to other women. It's also very important. So those are some of the things that are opening up, the temporal perspectives of the novel that are beginning to open up very early in the book, quite quickly, and they will be returned to again and again to form different patterns as the book goes on. This is also a very spatial novel. It's a novel that's very clearly set in specific locations in London. This is the various routes taken by characters in the novel. It's well worth doing a Google search for Clarissa Dalloway's London. You can find maps like this. And Clarissa Dalloway sets out from Westminster, which is down here, crosses the park, goes up to do her shopping, up to Piccadilly and then Bond Street, and then back again. Other characters' perambulations around the city come into the book later on. We've got Regent's Park appears. That's where Retzia and Septimus Smith are at the beginning of the novel. So we've got scenes that take us following Clarissa Dalloway through London, but also connections to other parts of the city from across the social register, we might say. We're told that the king and queen are at the palace. We're told about the mothers of Pimlico. We're told about ordinary people who are impressed by the figure of the very important person in the limousine. They're impressed to remember the dead. They're impressed to remember the flag and think of empire. And we're reminded of India, the farthest flung part of the empire, perhaps one of the most important at this time, where Peter Walsh has been. And Woolf, I think, uses the scene of the skywriting, the airplane that's flying over the middle of London, writing in smoke some advertising message. It's hard to make out. Characters seem to take different interpretations of what letters they're seeing, almost as if they're looking at clouds and finding there what they want to. And that connects up a bunch of other characters too, ancillary characters we might call them, across the middle of London, and then as far out as Greenwich, which is over to the east. It's where the line of zero longitude runs, and even at that moment we're reminded of Einstein and so on through this man who's just mowing his lawn in his backyard. So Woolf is really complicating our sense of time and space, as well as evoking the things that link people together with a sense of nationhood, I think. This is a novel that is almost trying to test and feel out a sense of nationhood, what being English, being British means in the 1920s at this point in history. But the real drama, I think perhaps the drama that gives us most satisfaction as we read, is probably the inner life of the characters. Clarissa's love of life, her divine vitality, this sense of connection. There are images of waves and webs that appear in the first few pages of the novel, and this is how I think we should think about the inner life of characters, the things that move them, peaks and troughs, and webs, the things that connect them. We have the scenes at Bourton, we have her feelings about Peter Walsh, we have her sense that she may not be very well educated, as she says herself. She's not a great reader or a great thinker, but she has a tremendously sharp, infallible instinct for people. Death comes into her mind, and this is another motif that runs through the novel. It's repeated. We get a couple of lines from Shakespeare's play Cymbeline, a song about death. Fear no more the heat of the sun or the furious winter's rages. That tag, fear no more, appears time and again. Clarissa engages in some rather sharp self-scrutiny. She recognizes that she has a longing for approval, and she finds this something that she doesn't particularly like about herself, but she can't avoid it. She also has this growing sense of invisibility. As a middle-aged woman, she feels that she's no longer the center of any particular attention. She's beginning to disappear from the lives of the people that are important to her and the lives of the people around her. And then we've got the first mention of Miss Kilman. If there's a villain in the novel, it's perhaps Miss Kilman, or she's one of the villains in the novel, if we can put it that way. And Clarissa's sense of violent emotion as she thinks about, with jealousy, about Miss Kilman's influence over her daughter.